All right, we should be recording, hopefully. Yeah. All right, so we're here on January 5th. January 5th is a good day. That's my birthday. And my lovely parents came up to see me, and I've been wanting to ask them some questions so we can archive it and share it with generations and, and Atlas and great grandkids, the others to come. So we'll just go back and forth and start with Dad. And so first off,
okay.
Just give your full legal name, where you're born, what date you were born.
Well, my full legal name is Robert. I always go by Bob. But Robert Wayne Bernard. And I like to imagine that Wayne is after John Wayne. Real man. No fluff.
I love that name, Wayne.
Okay, I was born 1941, February of 1941. So the Pearl Harbor attack occurred in December of 41, so I was about 10 months old. Somebody once asked me what I did at the time that the news came out about Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor, and I just allowed, well, I probably dirtied my pants.
Probably.
And that was in Beatrice, Nebraska, which is the county seat of Gage County, Nebraska, which is 50 miles directly south of Lincoln, the capital, and about 25 miles north of the Kansas state line. So it was in southeastern Nebraska and on the prairie.
Mm-hmm. Joyce?
Well, I was born Joyce Christina Karstens, and I was born on January 9th of 42 after the war had started. But I can remember as a little girl, things were rationed. Mom had a bag of sugar, the only bag of sugar she would get. And I remember going upstairs to the storeroom and getting out that 1 cup of sugar to take downstairs so she could make a cake, a chocolate cake. She always made chocolate cakes.
So were you born there as well?
I was born in Beatrice. A lot of people my age were born at home during that time, but I was born in a hospital in Beatrice.
Were you born in a hospital, Dad?
Yes, same hospital. Back then it was called a Lutheran hospital.
Yes.
Is it standing?
Yes, it is still standing.
Still there, but it's not in operation anymore as a hospital.
Well, it was a nursing home because your mom was there for a while.
Yep.
That's interesting. Okay, your parents. Tell about their names, their place of birth. You want to start, Dad?
Okay, well, my father was J.H. Bernard, and that was his name, just a letter J and a letter H. And that's the way it is on his birth certificate. He was born in Beatrice, too, well, on the farm, really, which is southeast of Beatrice. But people always said that those initials stood for Jonathan Henderson, because there is in his family a Jonathan and a Henderson. And so that just kind of stuck with him, although he always just went by J. If somebody wanted to spell, he used J-A-Y. And and my mother was Mildred Augustus Gunther. Her dad's name was August. He was one of, 9 or 10 kids. Again, they were all German, 100% German, born up around the Claytonia, Cortland area of Nebraska, also part of Gage County. And August had a bunch of brothers. I've heard of Uncle Win. Heard stories about him, one of the brothers, and there was an Uncle Dolph, several.
Adolf, short for Adolf.
Adolf, yes. And well, that's how my mother got the middle name of Augustus. Her dad was August, so they just feminized that, I guess. In Greek, there are nouns and proper nouns that can be used for either male or female, and sometimes they have a little bit of difference in them. And that's what they did with her name, with the August name, was add Augustus to it to make her for her middle name.
What were their birth dates? And where were they born?
Well, my mother's birthday was December 31st of I believe it was 11. And she was just a very small lady. Her mother was French. Her mother's name was Pithod, is an American pronunciation. She always thought in French it was Pitho. I don't know whether there's any. I never did study French. You might know that. But
Sounds right.
But she was small. She was the tallest she ever got was 4'11". So she never did make 5 foot tall. And she just said that since she was born on the end of the last day of the year, that God just made her with leftover scraps. That's why she's never did grow very big.
That's funny.
That's a question.
And your dad's birthday?
My dad's birthday was November something of like the 5th or so of November.
What year?
And he was born in 1910, so his age was always easy to keep track of. He was 10 years less than the calendar year. So in 1941, he was 31, and so on.
Were they both born in Gage County?
They were both born in Gage County, both born at home. Back then they had midwives that made the circuit in the counties or in the community. And I do have, well, you talked about grandfathers. My grandfather was from Tennessee. He was born in the hills of eastern Tennessee from a little village called Bull's Gap, Tennessee.
That was your dad's dad?
That was my dad's dad, yes. His name was William, I think his middle name was Henderson. Maybe that's where my dad's kind of got connected. But anyway, yes, he was born in Tennessee. He he moved from Tennessee to Nebraska in the late 1800s, about 1885 in that neighborhood. Rode a horse. He and his friend, what was his friend's name?
I don't remember.
Well, I'll think of it. They rode horses. They rode horseback out to Nebraska. And the story was that I've heard that the first time he saw a jackrabbit in his life was somewhere across northern Missouri or southern Iowa. They were on horseback riding and saw a jackrabbit jump up and run across the countryside. And Grandpa pulled out his 6-gun out of his holster and shot the rabbit on the run from horseback.
Oh my gosh. They had it for dinner.
Well, that's what they made for dinner, because back then when you traveled across the country, you had to provide for yourself. For
No
the
drive-throughs.
And quite often it wasn't unusual to have one meal a day or one bigger meal a day, because that's all you could find or all you could come across. But anyway, they rode out to Nebraska and they settled, and Grandpa settled there in Gage County at the little town of Wymore, Nebraska, which is also in Gage County. And it grew up because the Santa Fe Railroad came through there. Or was it to Burlington? It was the Burlington. Burlington, there was a line that ran from Chicago on out to Denver. And it came through that part of the country, and they built a roundhouse there where they could make repairs to their cars and to the engines. I remember watching that roundhouse work. They'd bring the steam engines in, not turntable, and get it turned so they could back it into one of the engine repair sheds for overhaul and maintenance and stuff. And that's the railroad is what built that little town of Wymore. But anyway, he hired on as farm help with the local farmers there for 4 or 5 years until he saved up enough money that he could make a down payment on his own farm. That's how he bought the farm where he did. Was from the money he'd earned working for it. And
he went back to
oh, that's right. He went back to Tennessee then one winter, and to get his bride would be the proper word, yeah, betrothed.
Did he know her before?
Yes, he had known her before. She was a member of the Berry family, was her maiden name, and he used to say there was never a bad berry in the bunch. But they were both on horseback, and her brother was a local preacher in Barnet Holler, it was called, and he married him. They were both on horseback at an intersection of two country roads, and when they got done with get them married, why they wheeled their horses around and they rode west to Nebraska.
What a honeymoon!
So Grandma came out to Nebraska on horseback, which, like she said, was quite a honeymoon. She got to see a lot of countryside on her trip.
And then your mom's parents?
My mom's parents were August and Carrie. Carrie Peathod, as I mentioned earlier, was a twin. She had a twin sister. And in August, we had 8 or 9 brothers and sisters. There again, we're both born in Gage County. Let's see, Carrie would have been my grandmother on my mother's side. Passed away, she died when my mother was 12 years old on Valentine's Day.
Oh, I didn't know about the Valentine's Day thing.
And when Mom went home from school, they went to school back then. They had a school bus, which was a horse-drawn wagon, and it was enclosed. And it was built with a wood stove at the back of the wagon that the boys going to school, the older boys' responsibility was tending that stove, keeping the fire going, and building the fire if there was no fire in it, and then keeping it going, and then, of course, watching it, because you don't want the fire to get out of the stove and burn the wagon up. But yeah, it was a horse-drawn wagon, and so she got home from school that day, and her dad met her and her brother at the end of the driveway and had to tell them that Mom had passed away that day.
Had she
And
been sick?
back then they kept the deceased person at the home. The undertaker would come out from the county seat back then and would prepare the deceased for burial, and then they would lay them in state in what was called, back in those days, they didn't have a living room, they had a parlor. So you had a kitchen and a dining room and a parlor, and then, of course, bedrooms. But so the deceased was just kept in the parlor. So as visitors came, they could view the deceased there. And then the practice went from that taking place at home to a funeral home in town in the county seat. And the reason was people couldn't travel. It was almost a half a day just to and a team of horses and wagon to get into the county seat. So you didn't have very rapid travel.
Mhm.
And so when the funeral homes were developed, this would have been in the 20s and maybe on into the early 30s. Of course, it became called a funeral home because the funeral now moved from the residence into the building in the county seat, and it became known as a funeral parlor. Picked up the name from the house. The houses then, the room that was called the parlor, became the living room. Obviously, now the deceased no longer stayed, so that's where the term living room came from.
Really?
Yes. Some houses then had what we would call today a living room and a parlor. Quite often, that's where if the wife or the family had a piano, the piano was kept in the parlor so that the doors could be closed, or kids could play in the parlor while the adult folks carried on a conversation in the living room. That's how all that stuff came about, just natural progression.
Just before we move on to Joyce, tell us, go back to your parents and tell us about their lives, who they were.
Okay, well, mom had gone to school. She graduated, what they call then, I think they just said graduated from school. And today we talk about high school, so a different grade and so on. But she graduated from the 10th grade, and that was the extent of the public education. And what she enjoyed most, she'd often said about school, was the home ec teacher. I don't know if they still have those kind of classes or not anymore.
They're called home sciences.
Wow, big title. But she enjoyed that teacher more than any of the others that she had. And my dad, of course, he was born on the farm in Gage County, and he attended school. Again, he also went through the 10th grade. And back then, it was not unusual for kids to, once they turned 16 or maybe even 15, that they could drop out of school, just as kids drop out today, which is not good. But he always had the intention of becoming a farmer like his dad, and he was just a farmer. He was proud of what he did, and the Bible tells us that the land is to stay fallow, Fallow, once every 7 years. That's where the old ancient Jews, they quit doing that for a number of, I think, for 70 years. Yes. They had not let any of their farm ground go fallow.
And then they were taken by the enemy.
That's why when Nebuchadnezzar captured him and took him off into captivity, that length of captivity was for 70 weeks of years. A week being 7 days, it was 7 years. So 7 times 7 is 490 years. I don't recall how all that worked out, but that's where those numbers came from. And lying fallow, what folks, their grandpa and dad did, they divided up their farm. They had 160 acres, that was a quarter section, 2 80-acre plots, and they divided that up, and so that about a 12-acre field they just let lay every year, and that rotated around their farm, which plot was laid fallow. What that does, It allows the soil to get rejuvenated and rebuild up with nitrogen and the minerals and iron and stuff that it needs to raise crops. And so after the field had laid fallow for a year, and then if they raised a field of corn, well, they would have a good crop of corn on that because of their earth being rejuvenated. But they were careful how they did that, and they made sure that they did that every year. And Dad too was he was enjoyed the 4-H. He was one of the 4-H leaders in the county, that part of the county, and helped establish the 4-H clubs in the county of Gage, there in Nebraska. And he was also always interested in the railroad because they were part of the years that the railroad was so important of developing the whole country, of taking materials from the east manufacturers on out into the prairie. For instance, hardware stores. There would be a hardware store way out in the prairie someplace. They had to be supplied with nuts and bolts and nails and plowshares and different items that the farmers needed. And then on a return trip, well, they'd haul the farmers' produce back into the cities for most of the cattle and livestock went to Chicago, to the packing houses in Chicago. And other fruits and vegetables and stuff would go on further east. So he was always interested in the Union Pacific Railroad. And back then we still had the steam engines that pulled the trains. That was before they went to diesel electric. But we've heard many a night you hear the train coming down the railroad, the whistle way a long ways away. And then as it gets closer, it whistles at every road crossing. And you can calculate by telling how much time it is between one crossing to the next. By the sound of the whistle, you could tell about how far away the train was. The little village of Holmesville that we lived in, there was a siding there, a railroad siding that, there was a depot where passengers could join and travel on the passenger cars, freight cars, and stock cars. Stock being cattle and hogs and horses and stuff. The train would leave the cars off on the siding so that they could be handled and loaded up. And then the next train would come by and they would stop there and hook onto those cars that were ready to be transported and take them on down or up the line. The railroad there came through Holmesville was the Union Pacific, and it ran from Lincoln to down to Manhattan, Kansas. And then from Manhattan, Kansas, it went on east and south a little bit. One branch went to St. Joseph, Missouri, and the other into Kansas City. That's how they've been putting their trains together for further destinations.
And your mother, what was?
Oh, she just was a homemaker. She enjoyed doing the homemaking, canning. She was quite a gardener, and she liked flowers very well. And she went to a country school. They lived west of Holmesville for a number of years before they moved to their farm closer to Holmesville. And she went to a country school over there. I forget what it was called. One-room school. And when she would walk to school, and of course, every year the snow gets deeper to hear her tell the story.
What's the story about her brother being World War II? I was always fascinated about that. World War I ambulance driver.
That was Uncle Dolph.
Oh, is her uncle?
Yes.
Oh, not her brother. Okay.
Yes, Uncle Dolph was in the United States Army in World War I and was an ambulance driver there in France, where a lot of the fighting was going on in northern France and eastern, and would have to haul the injured soldiers back towards Paris or wherever the hospital, field hospitals may have been.
And he survived, though.
And he survived. Mhm. They lived in a house in Beatrice then when we were children, and it was sat right on what was called back then 6th Street, east and west. And when Beatrice would have parades, well, you could sit on their front porch to watch the parade, which was
Convenient.
exciting for my daughters.
I don't remember. What about the homesteading? Did your family partake in that?
Yes, homesteading, that part of the Peathods, and I forget who all of the Guthers. The story was that Freeman was the man that had the first homestead in the Nebraska Territory, and it would have been one of my granduncles, I guess Grandpa Gunther's brothers or something, was
One of the first.
was one of the first back in those days, and his homestead was also in Gage County. The Peathods were homesteaders, and they homesteaded around Pickerel, Nebraska. So, what is that? Possum Creek runs through Pickerel.
Possum Creek.
And their homestead was down along the Possum Creek bottoms. I think that's about all of that
Interesting.
that I can recall.
Joyce, what about your parents?
Well, my dad's name was Gerhard Paul Karstens, but when my mom met my dad, she didn't like the name Gerhard, so she changed it to George. So he was always known as George after that. And he was born in the home where he was living at, there had been 2 other houses on that property, on that farm, but they had burned down. So the home he was born in was the 3rd farmhouse on that farm. And he had 4 brothers and sisters.
What year was he? What was his birthday?
My dad's birthday was May 13th, but I can't remember the year that he was born. And I can't remember the year that Mom was born, but she was born on the 19th of September. But I don't remember the year. My mom was the kind of person who never liked the past, and she would not talk about the past. And so anything that I learned was from my aunts at that time.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. None of us. She didn't like the past. It was hard. It was hard, and she just didn't want to talk about the past. My mom and dad only went through the 8th grade. I don't think my dad even went through the 8th grade. It was a hard life.
They were farmers. My dad got the home place when him and Mom got married. And they raised us 3 kids there. It was a wonderful life. Just did a lot of things. My grandma Karstens, my dad's mom, she was born at Lodgepole, Nebraska in a soddy. And I have pictures of that at home. Where's that from?
That is western Nebraska.
Oh, clear out.
Way
Then
out
what brought
Yes.
your parents east then?
to find land to buy.
To farm, better farming land, maybe.
Yeah. And like I say, my mom never talked about the past. I only know what I learned by.
So you don't know much about her parents?
No. She never talked.
You never heard stories from her brothers and sisters about?
They didn't either. The past was the past, and they just didn't.
Do you know, were they from that area though? Eastern Nebraska?
Yes, they were all born.
What about the German? The German is intriguing, how you grew up in a community that spoke German.
Yes, we all spoke German. I spoke German all through grade school. That was the only language we had.
Can you speak it now?
Yet, no. I know just certain words. Your dad will tease me about it once in a while. Some of the words that
And what was the name of the community that spoke German?
Gage County.
Oh, it was the whole county,
Yeah.
not just the little
It
town?
was the Zion Lutheran community. The Zion Lutheran Church was the mother church. It was a big cathedral on the prairies of Nebraska. It was packed every Sunday. I can remember chairs having to be set. It was a 2-story church and had a huge balcony. The stained glass windows, the altar, that all came from Germany.
Whoa.
Yes.
How did it get from Germany? Like up the Mississippi? How did the stained glass?
I don't know.
I'm sure it did.
Up the Mississippi and then a wagon from.
Probably came over to New Orleans on a ship, and then up the Mississippi, and then up the Missouri. There was a big port landing on the Missouri River in Nebraska City, and then it would have traveled by wagon train from there out.
Amazing. Is it standing?
Oh yes, it is. It's beautiful.
Is it stone?
Yes.
That's why.
All the stained glass windows in it. It's big. It has a pipe organ.
Is it in the middle of the prairie again, or is it in a city?
No, it's in the prairie.
It's just in the middle.
Yeah.
When do you think it was built?
Oh, late 1800s.
1857, or when was her 100th year anniversary?
Yeah, that was in
79.
1970. 75.
Something like that.
In the early mid 1800s, late 1800s.
Like she said, they had a pipe organ that came in, of course, from Germany also.
And the same gal that was playing it when I was a little girl growing up, she still is playing it today.
No.
Yes.
Then she must be 100.
Same age as me. She was.
Oh, I thought you said she grew up.
She was
when you were
2
little.
years older than I was, but she still plays the organ.
Well, you got to think of a church like that the members must have had a lot of money to be able to afford to build such
They were well-to-do German farmers, yes.
Were they well-to-do coming in, or did Nebraska make them well-to-do?
They did it. They worked it themselves and did it right there, yes.
Wow. So they must have been the first homesteaders, some of the first homesteaders.
Yes.
I don't remember, when was the Homesteading Act? 1820?
1860s, 60s.
Oh.
Abraham Lincoln set it up.
So then the church was built before that. You said mid-1800s or around the same time?
Yeah,
1860s and 70s, the church. What's there now, the cathedral that's there now is the second building.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, the first one was just a small little
But
church.
they took the same stained glass.
Yes.
And built it.
Yeah. And I also have a picture of a lot of the people dug down into the earth to live. And I have a picture of
A dugout.
So it's different, because I always think it was a soddy being like you dig out and then you put a sod on top, but this is different. This is you dig out and you put wood built roof.
No, it was just, you see this woman coming out of the ground in her Sunday best, big hat on, and you see the bars from the ladder coming up, and she's coming up to where the bars are that she has a hold of to get herself up on the ground.
So the ceiling is just the dirt hill.
Well, a lot of
the
them
roof.
out on the prairie, they'd come in and wagon, of course. And they'd start making their dugout, and turn the wagon upside down, that became the roof, the ceiling of the
Oh,
place.
and they meant for that to be temporary, probably
Oh,
before,
yes.
but some of them
Just
probably couldn't
temporary.
afford to ever move out, maybe.
The first thing the settlers did was get
The barn.
but they'd get living quarters just so the family had a place to live. And the first thing they built was the barn, and to get the barn producing for you, the barn would have a place to store hay so that it wouldn't go bad. And there would be stalls for horses and cattle. And that would be about all that would be in the smaller barns. And as time went by, they'd start building a bigger barn to have milk parlors and so on, and horse stalls.
And a place to put their hay.
And placed for the hay and some of the grain. They would have grain bins within the barn.
And their plows, probably next to the barn.
Yeah, and that would be what would they call a lean-to at the side with just a roof over it, where they could park machinery, kind of keep the machinery somewhat out of the weather.
But they were horse-drawn, right?
Everything was horse-drawn, yes.
Yeah. I remember the team of horses when I was just a little girl that my dad had. And then when he got his first tractor and the big threshing machine that sat on the place, and then all the neighbors took turns with it. It was taken from one neighbor to the next.
Oh, they shared it in the community.
Yeah.
In our
Huge
community, my
machines.
grandpa had owned the threshing machine.
It was shared.
And the steam engine that it took to run it, our neighbor Ray Brubaker, a mile east of us, would come down towards the end of June, come down the hill with that steam engine in order to hook onto the threshing machine to take it over to the Sims place or the Jones place or whatever, because they had wheat that was ready for harvest. And then they'd just start making the circuit around the community.
Would they help each other
And
out?
then they would help if.
All the neighbor men helped each other, and the teenage boys. They all,
that was.
What would the women do when the men, would they get together and
baking?
No, I mean, like, would they ever get together and do quilting or
Oh, yes.
when the men were out?
Some did.
My mom had a quilting frame set up in the living room the whole time. Well, it was the dining room and the parlor. So in the dining room, it was the dining room and the living room combined that my mom and dad had. And the parlor, like your dad said, was where the piano was and the velvet cushioned couch and chairs.
That you can't sit on unless company's there.
Exactly.
With doilies.
Yes, with
doilies on the
doilies.
arms and across the back.
And my mom always had a quilting frame up, making quilts for summer and winter.
Constantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So growing up, we know your parents didn't have running water. They had outhouses. And electricity came in. All that came in when you were younger or when
Yes.
they were? Like, what were the
No,
years?
when I was young. That
So, like,
all came in.
What came first, electricity or?
The natural gas.
Oh, gas came before even the water.
The natural gas line went
Pipeline,
across the land to the east of my mom and dad on the border of the neighbor's land and my mom and dad's land, and it was brought up to the farmhouse.
So you had a gas stove.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
See, that would have been the pipeline taking gas to Chicago.
Yes.
So when
Oh, so it was going east instead of, I was picturing it going west. It was going to
coming up out of Kansas and Oklahoma and taking
Oh, they'd have to go
natural gas to Chicago.
north and then Chicago. Oh, well, you got lucky that you're
Yeah.
on the way to
My
Chicago.
mom and dad talked about that many times. How
Really?
blessed that they had been to
Huh.
have that. And before that happened, when the farmers, like my dad, when they picked their corn, they put it through the sheller and the cobs. That was what we burned for heat. And those were stored in what was called the cob house. And it was my job to always keep the cob bin in the kitchen with cobs. And invariably there'd be mice in it. And they'd go jumping out of the basket as I'd be dumping the cobs back into the.
Did that scare you, or were you humored by that?
You were used to it. You were used to it. There was always mice around the house. Nothing you thought anything of, but today people have a fit if they have a mouse in the house.
Doesn't bother me a bit.
The first thing that we had at home there in Holmesville, we did have electricity when I was a little bitty kid. I remember when the electricity got to the farm, because Grandpa and Dad, when they would do the milking morning and evening, had to carry a kerosene lantern out with them in order to do the chores so they could see.
They didn't have a flashlight.
And that's right. And of course, you had to be awful careful with a kerosene lantern that you didn't knock it over and start a fire in the barn. But and then when they milked, all the milk was put in milk cans, and that was set in a tank of cold water close to the well.
Your phone's ringing.
So that the well, you'd pump water out of the well, went into the milk tank first to keep the milk cool. And then the overflow from that was piped on out to the cattle tank so that you could keep the cattle tank, keep water for the cows. So I remember when the electricity came there, we had one yard light out on the windmill tower that lit up the yard.
Yep.
And we had a couple of bulbs in the barn. But that meant then that we could get an electric operated milk separator to separate your cream from the milk. Before then, and then you had to run that by just turning the crank on the separator.
Did you have to do that? Was that your job?
We had to do that as kids, yeah. And also that, of course, led into the electric milking machines, which relieved all the hand milking. And that also meant that you can now have a refrigerated milk cooler in the barn.
And a refrigerator in the house.
Yes, and a refrigerator in the house. So I remember that happening.
Do you remember what year it came to the farm?
No, that would have been in the late 40s. And then I remember telephones coming through. That was a big thing. When everybody got a telephone.
Oh, they had party lines.
Everything was a party line, yeah.
Was your party line just Holmesville, or was it Beatrice? How big?
It would be 4 or 5 neighbors.
Oh, so it wasn't that big.
Yeah, no.
You did a nosy neighbor?
Was it?
Because that's how they would let you know if someone passed away. There was a certain ring that would come over the phone on the wall, and that let you know that someone
listen in.
And every woman who would hear it would listen in to find out who it was that had passed away.
Did they announce births as well, or just passing?
No, just passings. Just passings.
The church bell would ring, of course.
Yes.
Generally, you could hear the church bell ringing and then listen to the phone to find out who it was.
Yeah.
And then after that, indoor plumbing came after that then.
We didn't get indoor plumbing until I was a senior in high school. I always had the outhouse with the Sears Roebuck catalog or the Montgomery Ward's catalog.
As the toilet paper. Ouch.
And you didn't notice that.
Yeah, when a cold winter day, and it's a blizzard. Do you have memories of going out to that house in a blizzard?
Oh, yeah. We even had to take our baths in the wash house. Mom would heat, and during the summer you got one bath. That was on Saturday afternoons. And my sister would get the bath first.
She was youngest.
Yeah. And then Gary would be out in the field, so I would get mine after my sister. But the water would be kept until my brother would come in, and my dad would go to the pond.
Out in the cow pasture.
Yummy. After a hard day's work?
Yes.
It refreshed you.
Yes, it was. And soap, there was no nice soap like we have today. It was all lye soap. That was done, our clothes were washed in the lye soap. We took our baths with lye soap.
Did you add fragrance to it, like flower essence, or?
No, the lye soap was homemade. When they'd butcher this time of year in the wintertime, and they would render the fat. By that I mean they had a big huge black kettle that they had over a fire out in the driveway.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And they'd melt the fat down and to liquefy it. Yeah. And then there was a way that they could strain water through wood ashes. Yeah. And then that would pick up something, I forget now just what the formula was, out of the ashes. And then they'd mix that in with the fat.
Yeah.
And
so the cleaning properties came from the ashes, probably, not the fat.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The fat was just a binder.
Yeah.
For the cleaning properties.
And that's when you washed your hair.
And then that was poured out into slabs and thick slabs. And you cut that with a hot knife, of course. And for clothes washing, you would shave that.
Yeah.
And that's where, have you ever heard of ivory flakes?
Yeah.
That's where the name comes from. They would shave the old lye soap
and add it
into similar to flakes. And that's where ivory was one of the early manufactured soaps that was a little more mild. And
can't imagine any of that smelling good or people smelling good.
But you didn't notice it because everybody smelled.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know,
that was that's proof you had a bath.
And you didn't see girls with pimples or blackheads or anything, or guys. It just, none of them had that.
I kind of bring it back, makes me think of like other senses, like were there certain smells or church bells reminded me of things you heard that remind you of your childhood. And what is that? What are they? Sounds?
I think of the call to church in the morning. They would ring as we would be driving to church. The bells would.
So that was a good feeling then.
Yes. When someone would die, like Bob said, they would ring the church bell. Those church bells also came from Germany that were in. I'll have to show you pictures of that church sometime. And it still stands today.
Well, I see people today having a tractor with a backhoe on it, digging a grave in a cemetery.
They were done over.
Yeah, I've participated in grave digging.
Did you?
The men and boys in the community took turns taking care of grave digging. And depending on who had died and when, why it was next month will be so-and-so's turn. Get out there with a spade.
How young? What was the youngest you were when
we
you
would
dug
have
a grave?
been in the 12-year age, I think. Be about as young. I doubt if anybody 10 was there. They're got too much pep and zip and zing in them to stay at the job of grave digging.
Did they have you dig your relatives' graves, or were you exempt if it was
your
a relative?
turn? Sure.
Oh, it didn't matter if it was just as long as it was your turn.
Yeah.
People were tough in those days.
Mm-hmm.
When a relative died, there wasn't a lot of tears shedding in that. It was just, they went to heaven. You knew they went to heaven, and there were no tears.
And if a school kid passed away, they didn't have counselors come to counsel the poor little kiddies there. That's part of life is death.
All part of life. Death was as much a part of life as what being alive was. It was just no big thing. It was, they had lived their life, they had lived a good life, and they went on to be home with the Lord. Yeah. And nobody made a big thing. And we are still of that generation where we don't think anything of it when someone passes away. It's no big deal to us. If you've lived a good life, you've gone home to be with the Lord, and you see all of your grandparents and aunts and uncles and everybody like
And we
that.
know that everybody's days are numbered.
Yeah, God has our days all picked when He's going to take us home. And
But things
it's just so awesome.
that bring back memories is if I see a place with kerosene lanterns. I remember, just going by a place, and I've seen several of the kids I went to school with. You'd drive by their place of an evening. This time of year, it'd be 5:30, 6 o'clock, be dark, but you could tell by looking at the house if the lights are a kerosene lantern or if it's electric light bulb. There's a difference in the type of lighting. So that brings back memories, of course.
So the poor families had the kerosene for longer than is that right?
Somewhat, yes.
Yeah.
Primarily, it was just that the electric lines were still too far away.
Oh.
They would try to take the electric lines down the roads that would have the most customers along the road. And some of the side roads
They didn't have it.
didn't have it. Mary Gerhardt, they lived down on a creek called Bloody Run.
Oh my.
Now that got its name from the Indian War along the creek. And that kind of gives you an idea of what was going on in the Indian War. That's been Bloody Run ever since.
What Indians were there?
Pawnee was one of the big ones. The Oto from Omaha Indians, from Omaha, of course. And they were most of them were all members of the Sioux tribe, but the Sioux tribe has different.
Jake opened the door by himself.
Oh, he wants in.
Keep talking. I'll shut it.
He did get it all. We got it open. That's a little hard. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll each talk about your favorite childhood memory, and then we'll pause it, go to lunch, and maybe afterwards talk about since your childhood. Is that okay?
Yeah.
This is fun. I'm learning so much. I wish I would have done this years ago. Okay, favorite childhood memory, Dad.
Favorite? Oh, that's hard.
Or you don't have to do. You could do most impactful. It doesn't have to be a good memory. It could be
Well, there was
something that
just my
changed
brother
you.
and I. He was older than me. We were 16 months apart, so we were close. But we did a lot of fishing and hunting. We were outdoors people because that's all you had. Yeah, to play.
No games, no
Yes.
track.
As little kids, at 6, 7 years old, to play, we would go out and in the dirt. But that was good for people because that's how your body built up its immune system. So when I hear people that want their kids to not go outside because you catch a cold, that's on purpose.
Yeah.
You're supposed to catch a cold. Yeah. Anyway, we did a lot of fishing and hunting. So a lot of our time was spent down on a creek bank. There was Mud Creek.
Jake. What creek or crick? Was it?
Creek.
What was the name of it? Which one?
Well, Mud Creek was one of the ones.
Mud.
Cedar Creek. Like I said, Bloody Run, which emptied into Mud Creek.
Yeah.
And then there was Bear Creek. It was almost a river-sized creek.
Bear Creek was?
Bear Creek, yes. There's Turkey Creek. Now, all these creeks got their name from Possum Creek. Probably one of the early travelers through there came across a lot of opossum down there, and that became the name of the creek. Same way with mud, because it looked like mud.
But yeah, the Big Blue River, the Little Blue, they were just as blue and crystal clear.
In the pioneer days, they said you could walk up to the bank of the Blue River and see the fish, just like down in southern Missouri.
Oh,
The
like
water was
spring
that clear,
fed.
yes.
Huh.
But today they're just muddy waters.
That's because they started plowing up all the sod and
Oh,
the rains and stuff, just there's enough topsoil washed off and the runoff from the rainwater that it just caused them all to become muddy.
There was no running water in houses.
No,
You
that was
had
all
to-
carried from the well.
From the well.
Our job as kids was to go out
Yeah.
and to the pump and take the kitchen bucket of water and fill it full of water and bring it back in the house.
And there'd be one dipper in the
For
bucket
everybody.
of water. Everybody drank from that one dipper.
mm.
All the
You didn't take the dipper and pour it into your.
No.
Little
we just
tin
drank
cup?
it from the
From the dipper.
dipper.
Then you hand it to the next person.
Yeah.
They did that at schoolhouses too.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Every kid in the school, that's how they spread the measles around. That was on purpose. That built up their immunity system. Mhm. And one of the other jobs as a kid was we had to shovel the path to the outhouse, shovel the snow off.
Yes.
Oh,
Well,
nice.
somebody had to do that.
Yeah.
I can remember during blizzards, as kids in school, there was 12, 13 of us in school, all grades. And after the blizzards, we would tunnel through the snow, and
Uh-huh.
all the windows on our school was all on the north side. So we could watch as kids would have to go to the outhouse, and invariably one of them would fall through the tunnel. They never got
And if
hurt.
you're on the way to the outhouse, that was kind of
Yeah.
slowed you down.
I bet that did.
And you had to dig yourself out real quick so you could keep going to the outhouse.
So your favorite memories was playing in the creek with your brother. What would you guys
Yeah.
do?
Well, fishing.
Fish?
Fishing,
Oh.
most of it.
Uh-huh.
But of course, you'd walk in the creek, and that's how you caught crawdads, and you learned about wildlife living in the creek.
Keep talking.
Now that's back outside.
Oh, that's a dog.
Yes. Oh, goodness.
Did you have a curfew from the creek? Did you have to be home at dinner time, you and Jim?
Well, you normally would if you were a boy.
Wanted to
You were
eat.
hungry. Yeah. But if we weren't home, my mom would go out on the porch, and she was a good singer, soprano, and she would
I didn't
sing.
get that.
You've heard the song, come home, it's dinner time,
Supper time.
or supper
Sing it.
time, yeah. I don't know it, I can't sing.
Yes, you
he
can. Yes, you can.
Yes, he can.
I don't know if I know that song. Come home, it's dinner time.
It's dinner time. The shadows lengthen slowly or something like that.
And
My
you
mom
heard her
would
from
just yell
afar.
out.
Yeah,
the
that was
window.
embarrassing because everybody in town could hear her.
It's Did the kids make fun of you? Your mother was singing again.
No,
Yeah,
but
they liked her singing.
Heidi Hellman would.
Heine?
Heidi, yeah.
What a
Heidi Hellman.
name. Is that a female? Oh, it's a male.
He was a retired railroad worker. And he and Earl Essex, who lived a block or two from him, they did a lot of fishing in the Blue River. For the great big catfish.
Mm.
And I've gone by Earl's place, and they had a clothesline. Everybody, they had, what do they call it? Ecologically approved clothes dryers.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. It was a line, out in the yard.
Oh, right.
Mhm. So it was, they conserved energy, and they used renewable source energy.
Right.
People were a little bit smarter back then than they are today.
A whole lot smarter. And kids knew how to play without all these plastic toys. We didn't have toys.
You could play with a stick.
Yeah.
It's imagination.
I'd have a real long stick and I'd pretend that was my horse and I'd go bouncing through the trees.
What's your best childhood memory?
They're all wonderful.
Isn't that one that stands out? Like
Going to Christmas time, going to church at Christmas time,
our
like Christmas Eve.
programs, Christmas Eve was church. And then a week before Christmas would be the school Christmas program, and everybody was involved. I went to a little one-room schoolhouse, and it would be packed with all the parents.
What was the name of the school?
Evergreen.
Evergreen.
Evergreen. So what did you play? What part have you played?
There were different. It wasn't just all one long program. It would be different sections. One would be for the little kids, and then for those that were a little bit older, and then those were in the 7th and 8th grade. So each age group got to have their program, and they'd have a curtain up across and a curtain down each side, so you had a stage and the dressing area on each side.
But you don't remember a part you played when it stood out?
No, because everybody's was as important. I never thought of any of mine as being more important. They were all important.
So Christmas in the church, what stands out that you remember?
What stands out?
Everyone singing, or
you would have to be in Zion Lutheran Church. It is beautiful. It is unlike any church around. It's the altars up front, but everybody was in it. Everybody had a little part to say, and everybody sang.
Oh, all the congregation had a part?
All the children.
Oh.
All the children. And then all the parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles would come.
Oh, in the
It's
church.
a huge church. It was 400 or 500 people on Sundays in church.
Which for a farming community, that's quite a number.
So that's where you got to meet up with everyone and. Love it. Okay, well, thank you. We've got an hour in, and we'll do a little bit more afterwards. So we should go to lunch.
Okay.
But this is good, right? Over and out. Thanks.